Sheriff William Turner was a man known across the small American town for his discipline and authority. People said he never bent the rules, never once allowed emotions to cloud his judgment when it came to the law. For years, he walked with pride in his uniform, holding his head high as if the weight of the whole county rested on his shoulders. But what many in town did not know was that behind his stern face and his heavy badge, William Turner was just a father who loved his daughter more than anything else in the world. Her name was Emily, and she was the bright spark that softened his hard edges. Emily was 16, full of life, and known for her kindness. She had her mother's gentle eyes and her father's quiet strength. She dreamed of becoming a teacher one day, and she often spent her afternoons helping the younger children in the neighborhood with their reading and sums. While other girls her age spent their time gossiping or showing off new dresses, Emily would be seen sitting with a child on the porch, patiently guiding them through books or playing with them in the fields. The town adored her, and some even said she was the heart of the sheriff's house. For William Turner, Emily was more than a daughter. She was his peace. After long days of chasing lawbreakers and dealing with endless complaints, he would come home to Emily's laughter. She had a way of teasing him just enough to make him smile, and though he often tried to stay serious, he could never resist her charm. She knew her father's habits, the way he liked his coffee, the way he sat quietly at the end of the day staring at the fire, lost in thought. She would often sit beside him, asking questions about the stars or about the world beyond their little town. He would pretend to be annoyed, but inside he loved every second of it. Life in their small town moved slowly, with seasons marking the rhythm of people's days. Summer brought fairs, music, and dusty roads, while winter wrapped the streets in silence. For Emily, every season was a chance to find beauty. She loved gathering flowers in spring, and she never missed an opportunity to feed the poor families during Christmas with her own small savings. Many times townsfolk whispered that the sheriff's daughter had a heart too kind for the world. But life has a way of testing the strongest bonds, and one autumn evening, everything changed. Emily had returned from school looking more tired than usual. She brushed it off, laughing at her father's worried expression. She claimed it was just the chill in the air, but as the evening passed, her cough grew worse and her skin became pale. By nightfall, Emily was burning with fever. William, who had faced criminals and dangerous moments without a flicker of fear, felt his hands shake as he touched his daughter's forehead. It was burning hot. He called for the town doctor, but soon learned that the man had traveled 2 counties away to attend to a distant patient. Panic began to crawl into the sheriff's chest. Emily's breaths were shallow, her body weak, and her eyes filled with pain. He sat beside her bed, wiping the sweat from her face with a damp cloth, whispering that she would be fine. He tried to stay strong, but his heart was breaking. Neighbors gathered when word spread that Emily was sick. They stood quietly in the yard, some praying, others offering help. Among them was an old woman who mentioned the name of a doctor in the neighboring town, Dr. Samuel Harris. Everyone knew of him. He was skilled, experienced, and had saved countless lives. Some even said he was the best doctor in the region. But in that time, the color of Dr. Harris's skin was enough for some to doubt him. He was a black physician, and while many respected his talent, others still held on to prejudice that blinded them from seeing his true worth. Sheriff Turner did not care about such things. In that moment, Emily was all that mattered. He ordered his deputies to ride at once and bring Dr. Harris to the town. His voice carried the weight of desperation and authority, leaving no room for questions. The deputies saluted and left. But what William did not know was that among them were men whose hearts were still poisoned by the old ways of hate. Inside the house, Emily's condition worsened. She whispered weakly to her father, asking him to tell her a story like he used to when she was little. He held her hand and told her about the time she caught a butterfly and refused to let it go until he promised to buy her a jar so it could have a home. She smiled faintly, and for a moment it felt like she was that little girl again. But the smile faded quickly as another wave of fever shook her small body. The sheriff's wife had passed away years ago, and Emily was all he had left. Memories of his late wife came rushing back as he sat by Emily's side, begging silently for her to hold on. He remembered her laughter in the kitchen, her warm presence at church, her gentle way of holding Emily as a baby. He had promised to protect Emily always, and now, watching her slip away, he felt powerless for the first time in his life. Hours dragged on like days. Every tick of the clock felt heavier than the last. Outside, the wind howled as if nature itself was echoing the pain inside the sheriff's house. Neighbors came with soups, warm blankets, and prayers, but nothing seemed enough. Everyone waited for the sound of hooves, for the sight of the doctor who could bring hope. But the night grew colder, and still there was no sign. Emily's breathing became uneven, and William leaned closer, whispering, "Hold on, sweetheart. Help is coming." His eyes stayed fixed on the door, waiting for someone to bring salvation. He had faced countless battles in his career, but this one, watching his daughter fight for her life, was the hardest of all. By the middle of the night, the sheriff felt torn between fear and anger. He wondered why it was taking so long, why his deputies had not yet returned. He prayed they were riding fast, leading Dr. Harris back to the town. He had no idea that at that very moment, his daughter's chance of survival was being held at the border of the county, stopped not by fate, but by the ignorance of men who wore the same badge he trusted. As the night stretched on, Emily clutched her father's hand, whispering his name in weakness. The sheriff pressed her hand to his lips, promising again and again that she would be fine. He did not allow tears to fall, but his heart was already breaking. The house, once filled with Emily's laughter, was now drowned in silence, broken only by her labored breathing. And while William Turner sat helpless, believing help was on its way, destiny was being decided on a dark road miles away, where prejudice had stopped compassion, and time was running out for the only person he truly lived for. The news of Emily's illness spread quickly through the little town. By morning, everyone knew that Sheriff William Turner's beloved daughter was lying weak in bed, fighting for every breath. The townsfolk whispered to each other in worried tones. They knew how much the sheriff loved his only child, and they also knew that the town's doctor was far away. The hope of saving Emily now rested on the arrival of Dr. Samuel Harris, the doctor from the neighboring town. His name carried weight. People had heard stories of how he performed near miracles, saving lives when everyone else had given up. Dr. Harris had once saved a boy who fell from a horse and nearly broke his spine. Another time, he had treated a farmer's wife who had a complicated birth when no other doctor dared to take the case. Everyone agreed that if anyone could save Emily, it would be him. The sheriff, desperate and determined, had sent his deputies to fetch him with strict orders. The men had ridden out at once, dust rising behind their horses, carrying the heavy responsibility of bringing back hope. But not every man who wore the sheriff's badge shared his heart. Among the deputies were those who still held bitterness toward Dr. Harris because of the color of his skin. These men carried prejudice deep in their bones, and while they followed the sheriff's command and appearance in their minds, they questioned it. One deputy, a man named Jack, spat on the ground as he rode, muttering that the sheriff had lost his senses, asking a stranger to tend to his child when others could be called. His companion, Deputy Cole, nodded in agreement, saying that it was shameful to put the sheriff's daughter in the hands of someone they did not respect. When they reached the county line, they saw Dr. Harris waiting with his bag already packed. The doctor had left his home without hesitation when he heard the news. He knew the sheriff by name, and though he had never met Emily, he understood what it meant for a father to beg for help. He stood tall, calm, and ready, his black coat dusted from the road. "I came as quickly as I could," Dr. Harris said, lifting his bag. "Take me to her now." But instead of welcoming him, the deputies looked at him with narrowed eyes. Jack moved his horse forward, blocking the road. "You won't be going any further," he said coldly. Dr. Harris frowned. "The girl is very sick. Every minute matters. Please take me to her." Cole sneered. "We don't need you. We'll call another doctor. You just go back where you came from." The doctor's heart sank. He had seen this before, ignorance and pride standing in the way of life. But he did not move back. He held his ground, speaking firmly, yet with dignity. "You know as well as I do that no other doctor is near. The sheriff's daughter may not survive the night without help. If you delay, her life will be on your hands." His words stirred discomfort in one of the younger deputies, a man named Daniel. Daniel was new to the force and still believed in justice more than prejudice. He shifted uneasily in his saddle and said, "The sheriff gave us an order. We're supposed to bring him." Jack shot him a glare. "Quiet, boy. You don't understand how things work around here." The minutes ticked by. Dr. Harris stood patiently, though his heart raced. He thought of the young girl waiting, struggling to breathe while these men wasted precious time. He tried again, his voice steady but urgent. "This is not about pride. It's about a child's life. Don't let hatred blind you." But Jack and Cole were unmoved. They forced their horses forward, creating a barrier on the narrow dirt road. Dust swirled in the air as the standoff grew tense. Dr. Harris clutched his bag tighter, refusing to leave, though he knew his presence was unwelcome. Back in town, the sheriff was pacing the floor like a restless lion. Emily's fever had not broken, and her cough was tearing through her small body. She cried softly for her father, and William sat by her side, stroking her hair, whispering words of comfort he did not even believe himself. Every creak of the door made him turn his head sharply, hoping it was the deputies returning with the doctor. But the door remained closed. His worry turned into frustration, and frustration turned into dread. Neighbors continued to gather outside. Some whispered about Dr. Harris and wondered if the sheriff's men would truly bring him. Old Mrs. Jenkins, who had lost her husband to illness years ago, shook her head and said, "If they keep him back because of foolish pride, God help us all." Others nodded silently, knowing the truth but too afraid to speak it aloud. Meanwhile, at the county line, the argument dragged on. Daniel finally gathered his courage and spoke again. "This isn't right. The sheriff ordered us to bring him. We can't stand here while his daughter dies." Jack's face darkened. "You're still green, Daniel. Don't tell me what's right. The sheriff will thank us later when his girl is treated by someone decent." Dr. Harris clenched his jaw. He had faced this kind of cruelty many times before, but this moment felt heavier. He thought of Emily's face, though he had never seen her. He imagined a young girl lying in bed, her life slipping away, and his hands, capable of saving her, being held back by men's hatred. He took a deep breath, looked at Daniel, and said, "If you believe in what's right, then stand aside and let me pass. Every moment counts." Daniel hesitated. His heart told him the doctor was right, but his fear of defying senior deputies kept him frozen. In the end, silence won, and he lowered his head, saying nothing. The sun began to dip lower, painting the sky with red and gold. Time was running out, but the deputies held their ground. Dr. Harris remained there, carrying his bag, ready to give help, yet powerless against the walls of prejudice standing before him. In town, Emily's breaths grew shallower. The sheriff's worry turned into fury as he realized the delay was unnatural. He gripped the edge of his chair, his knuckles white, praying silently, pleading for a miracle. Emily opened her eyes briefly, whispering, "Papa, is the doctor here yet?" William forced a smile, his voice breaking as he replied, "He's coming, sweetheart. He'll be here soon." But deep down, he felt the weight of something terrible pressing on his chest. Outside, the night air grew colder, and the lanterns in the sheriff's house flickered as if echoing the fading hope inside. The townsfolk shifted uneasily, sensing that something was wrong. Still no sound of horses approached. No figure of the doctor appeared at the door. And at the county line, Dr. Harris continued to wait, his heart heavy with frustration and sorrow. The road to the sheriff's house was only a few miles away, yet it might as well have been an ocean. His skills, his knowledge, his willingness to save a life, all of it was trapped by the stubborn hands of men who refused to see beyond their own hate. The sheriff sat by his daughter's side, holding her fragile hand as if his grip alone could keep her alive. He whispered a prayer into the night, not knowing that the answer was already waiting just outside the town, stopped not by distance, but by human cruelty. The sheriff's house felt heavy with silence, broken only by Emily's faint coughs and the sound of her father's footsteps pacing the wooden floor. Sheriff William Turner, who had faced countless dangers in his career, now felt completely powerless. He had stopped outlaws, settled disputes, and faced angry crowds with courage, but nothing had ever shaken him like seeing his daughter's strength slip away. He pressed a damp cloth to her forehead, whispering soothing words, though his own heart was filled with fear. Emily's skin was pale, her lips dry, and her eyes glassy with fever. Sometimes she drifted into restless sleep only to wake moments later, struggling to breathe. Each time she opened her eyes, she searched for her father's face, and each time he leaned closer, forcing a smile he no longer felt. "I'm here, sweetheart. Don't worry. Help is coming," he kept saying. But inside, a storm of dread grew larger with each passing hour. The townsfolk outside grew more anxious. Neighbors who once only came for Sunday gatherings or small talk at the market now stood in hushed groups by the sheriff's fence. Mothers held their children close, men bowed their heads in quiet prayer, and elderly women whispered old hymns. Everyone knew Emily. She had touched their lives in some way, whether by helping their children with lessons or offering a kind word when they needed it most. Seeing the sheriff's house lit through the night with lanterns, they felt her struggle as if it were their own. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. The sheriff's deputy, Daniel, finally returned from his post at the county line, his face pale. He stood at the door, hat in hand, unsure of how to speak. Sheriff Turner noticed him and rushed over. "Where is the doctor?" he demanded, his voice sharp and filled with hope. Daniel hesitated, his lips trembling. He could not bring himself to admit the truth. "There's been a delay," he muttered, eyes on the floor. "A delay?" the sheriff thundered. "My daughter is dying and you speak of delays? What happened?" Daniel's silence spoke louder than words. The sheriff's eyes narrowed, suspicion rising, but before he could press further, Emily let out a soft cry. He turned back to her side, his anger pushed aside by his need to comfort her. Daniel quietly stepped back into the shadows, guilt pressing heavily on his young shoulders. The sheriff sat beside Emily again, holding her trembling hand. She whispered faintly, "Papa, tell me a story, like you used to." His throat tightened. For a moment he could not find his voice. But then he began to speak softly about the time they went fishing by the river, when she was only a little girl. She had caught a fish so small it slipped right out of her hands and back into the water. She had laughed so hard that even William, usually so serious, could not help but laugh with her. Emily's lips curved into the faintest smile at the memory. But soon another coughing fit shook her fragile body, wiping away the moment of peace. The hours dragged on like years. Midnight passed, then 1 o'clock, then 2. Still no sign of the doctor. Sheriff Turner's worry grew unbearable. He sent another rider out to check on the deputies, praying for good news. But deep inside he began to suspect betrayal. He tried to push the thought away, telling himself his men would never dare disobey his orders. But the silence on the road, the endless waiting, gnawed at his soul. The young deputy Daniel stood outside, his conscience tearing him apart. He knew what was happening at the county line, knew that Dr. Harris was being stopped, yet he had not spoken the truth to the sheriff. He leaned against the fence, staring up at the cold stars, wishing he had the courage to do what was right. Every cry from the sheriff's house stabbed his heart. He thought of Emily's kind smile, the way she had once thanked him for carrying her books from school. And now here he was letting her suffer because he was too afraid to stand against older deputies. Inside the house, Sheriff Turner's patience began to break. He slammed his fist against the table, startling the neighbors who had gathered inside to help. "Where is that doctor?" he roared. "Why hasn't he come?" No one had an answer. Some lowered their eyes, unwilling to speak what they suspected, that the delay was not an accident. Emily stirred again, her voice barely above a whisper. "Papa, am I going to be okay?" His heart shattered at the question. He brushed her hair gently, fighting back tears. "Yes, sweetheart. You're strong. You'll be fine. Just hold on." But as he spoke, his voice cracked, betraying his fear. Emily tried to smile, as if to comfort him instead. The sheriff stepped outside for a moment to breathe the cold night air. He looked at the crowd, their faces pale with worry. He felt their eyes on him, waiting for answers he could not give. For the first time in his life, William Turner, the man known for strength and certainty, felt completely lost. Back at the county line, Dr. Harris still stood with his bag in hand. His eyes burned with frustration, but he did not raise his voice. He had learned long ago that anger only fueled more hate. Instead, he spoke with quiet firmness, reminding the deputies of their duty. "Every minute you waste here, a child suffers. Let me pass. Do what is right." But Jack and Cole remained unmoved, their arms crossed, their horses planted firmly across the road. They were stubborn, blinded by old ways. "You're not setting foot in that town," Jack sneered. "Not while I'm here." The younger deputy, Daniel, who had returned earlier, could still hear their words echoing in his mind. He knew the truth, yet he had allowed it to remain hidden. Inside, his guilt grew heavier. Back in the sheriff's house, the lanterns flickered low. The sheriff sat by Emily's side again, holding her hand tightly as if his grip alone could keep her alive. He whispered prayers under his breath, words he had not spoken in years. He begged for strength, begged for a miracle, begged for the doctor who still had not arrived. The sheriff's heart ached with suspicion now. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. He thought of his deputies, of the time that had passed. The anger in his chest rose like a storm, but he pushed it down, focusing on Emily. She needed him calm, not raging. Emily's breathing grew shallower as the night went on. Each rise and fall of her chest was slower, weaker. The sheriff felt the panic in every breath she took. He kissed her hand, whispering again and again, "Hold on, sweetheart. Just hold on a little longer." The room was filled with the scent of herbs neighbors had brought, with the soft murmurs of prayers, and with the sound of a father's breaking heart. And while the sheriff clung to hope inside his home, outside on a lonely dirt road, the best doctor in the region stood ready to save her, stopped not by distance, but by the cruelty of men who wore the same badge as her father. The night dragged on, heavy and endless. Sheriff William Turner had not slept for a single minute. He sat beside Emily's bed, his hands trembling as he tried to cool her burning forehead with a cloth soaked in water. Her breaths came slow and shallow, each one weaker than the last. The neighbors who had gathered in the room stood in silence, their faces filled with grief. They could feel the weight of what was happening, and they knew that time was slipping away. The sheriff's heart was torn between hope and suspicion. Something inside him whispered that the delay of the doctor was not natural. He trusted his men, yet his instincts told him otherwise. Every time the door creaked, his head shot up, expecting to see Dr. Harris walking in with his bag. But the door stayed closed, and Emily's life continued to slip through his fingers. Finally, one of the neighbors, an elderly man named Thomas Gray, stepped forward. His hands shook as he removed his hat. "Sheriff," he said gently, "word is spreading in town. People say Dr. Harris came when he heard the call, but your men kept him out." The sheriff froze. His eyes narrowed, his jaw clenched. "What did you say?" he demanded, his voice low and dangerous. The old man shifted uncomfortably, glancing at Emily before answering. "They say Dr. Harris has been waiting at the county line, waiting for hours. He tried to come, but some of your deputies stopped him." The words hit William Turner like a hammer. He rose from his chair so suddenly that the water basin tipped over, spilling across the floor. Fury and disbelief clashed in his chest. He stormed toward the door, but paused when Emily stirred weakly, whispering, "Papa." He rushed back to her side, kneeling beside the bed. Her eyes fluttered open, filled with pain yet searching for him. He forced a smile he did not feel. "I'll be right back, sweetheart. I promise." He pressed a kiss to her forehead, then stood tall, his face carved with rage and sorrow. Without another word, he grabbed his hat and stormed out of the house. The crowd outside parted as he stepped into the night. The sheriff's boots pounded against the dirt road as he mounted his horse with a strength born of fury. He spurred the animal forward, racing toward the county line, the wind biting his face and the hooves striking sparks against the rocks. His heart thundered in rhythm with the gallop, a storm of grief and anger surging inside him. At the county line, the scene was tense. Dr. Harris still stood with his medical bag in hand, calm yet weary after hours of waiting. Jack and Cole leaned against their horses, smug and stubborn, while Daniel sat a short distance away, his head in his hands, guilt eating at him. The stillness of the night was shattered by the thunder of hooves. The sheriff rode into view, his face pale with fury, his eyes blazing. The deputy straightened, surprised. Jack stepped forward. "Sheriff, we were—" But before he could finish, William dismounted, his boots striking the ground hard. He strode toward them, his voice a roar. "You were what?" "Stopping the only man who could save my daughter?" Jack faltered but tried to stand firm. "We thought it wasn't right, Sheriff." "That man—" "Enough!" the sheriff thundered, his voice shaking the air. "You disobeyed a direct order. Because of your hate, my daughter is dying." His words cracked with pain. His hands clenched at his sides as if holding himself back from striking the men he had once trusted. Dr. Harris stepped forward then, his voice calm but heavy with sorrow. "Sheriff, there is no time. Let me go to her now." The sheriff turned, his rage giving way to desperate hope. "Come with me, doctor, please." His voice broke on the last word. Dr. Harris nodded, lifting his bag. He mounted his horse swiftly, ready to ride. The sheriff glared at his deputies one last time, his voice cold as ice. "When this night is over, you will answer for this." Without another word, he and Dr. Harris rode hard toward the town, the night air filled with the pounding of hooves. The sheriff leaned forward, urging his horse faster, praying that there was still time. Back at the house, Emily's breathing had grown faint. Her small chest rose and fell like the flutter of a bird's wing. Neighbors wept quietly, some holding hands, others whispering prayers. The room felt heavy, as if the very walls shared the sorrow of those inside. When the sheriff burst through the door with Dr. Harris at his side, hope flickered in the room like a sudden flame. "He's here," William cried. "The doctor's here." Dr. Harris wasted no time. He set down his bag, pulling out instruments and medicines with practiced speed. He leaned over Emily, checking her pulse, her breathing, her fever. His face was focused, his hand steady. The sheriff stood back, trembling, watching every movement with desperate eyes. But as minutes passed, Dr. Harris's expression grew grim. He worked quickly, giving Emily medicine, trying to ease her breathing, trying everything he could. The neighbors watched in silence, their hearts in their throats. The sheriff gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles white, as if his strength alone could keep his daughter alive. Emily stirred faintly, her eyes fluttering open. She looked at her father, then at the stranger beside her. "Papa, is this the doctor?" she whispered. William knelt beside her, tears brimming in his eyes. "Yes, sweetheart. He's here now. You'll be fine. Just hold on." Emily tried to smile, but it was weak, fleeting. Her hand slipped into her father's, her fingers cold. Dr. Harris continued to work, his voice calm as he instructed the sheriff to lift her slightly, to help her breathe easier. William followed every word, clinging to hope with all his might. But then, as the minutes dragged on, Emily's breathing slowed. Her chest rose one last time, then fell still. The room froze. Dr. Harris pressed his ear to her chest, checked her pulse, tried once more, but then lowered his head in sorrow. "I'm sorry," he said softly, his voice breaking the silence. "It's too late." The words tore through William like a knife. He let out a sound of pure grief, collapsing beside his daughter's bed, clutching her lifeless hand to his chest. "No, Emily, no!" His cries filled the room, shaking even the hardest hearts. Neighbors wept openly, some turning away, unable to bear the sight. Dr. Harris stood quietly, his eyes heavy with sorrow. He had come ready to save, but hatred had stolen the time he needed. He looked at the sheriff, his heart aching for the man's loss. He knew no words could ease this pain. The sheriff's deputies arrived at the house moments later, their faces pale when they saw the scene. They shifted uncomfortably, shame written across their features. They had not expected the cost of their actions to look like this. A young girl gone, her father broken. The sheriff rose slowly, his face streaked with tears, his eyes blazing with fury. He pointed a trembling hand at them. "You did this," he said, his voice low but sharp as a blade. "Your hate killed my daughter." The room fell silent, the weight of his words sinking into every soul present. That night, as lanterns flickered and Emily's body lay still, the sheriff's house became a place of grief and anger. The sound of his cries echoed through the town, carried by the wind. And for the first time, the men who had always walked with pride in their badges felt the crushing shame of what their prejudice had cost. The dawn broke over the town with a quiet, sorrowful light. The streets were empty except for the whispers of neighbors who had stayed through the night. Inside the sheriff's house, a heavy silence hung over the rooms. Sheriff William Turner sat beside his daughter's bed, his head resting against his hand. Emily's small body lay still under the blankets, her soft features calm now, but her warmth and life gone forever. His heart felt hollow, as if a part of him had been ripped away. He could barely speak. Every word he tried to form caught in his throat. The room smelled faintly of the herbs and medicines Dr. Harris had brought, a reminder of the desperate efforts to save her. William's mind replayed every moment of the night, the frantic pacing, the whispered prayers, the hope and fear, and finally the devastating realization that prejudice had stolen precious hours. The sheriff rose slowly, moving to the window. The town outside was waking, but nothing felt the same. People whispered, pointing at the house, feeling grief and guilt for what had happened. Some had known about Dr. Harris being stopped. Others only learned the truth now. William knew that change had to come from this tragedy, though the thought offered little comfort. Dr. Harris, the doctor who had come ready to save Emily, stood quietly in the corner. His face was calm, but his eyes carried deep sadness. He had done all he could, but he could not turn back time. He approached the sheriff gently. "Mr. Turner," he said softly, "I am deeply sorry. I wish I had arrived sooner." The sheriff looked up at him, tears streaking his face. "It's not your fault, Doctor. It's mine. I trusted men I thought I could rely on. And now—" His voice cracked, unable to finish. He sank into a chair, holding his daughter's hand in both of his. The warmth that had been her presence was gone, and with it went the small light that had guided him through his life. Outside, the deputies who had blocked Dr. Harris arrived. Their faces were pale, guilt etched into every line. They had never imagined the true cost of their stubbornness. They had acted out of pride, ignorance, and prejudice, and now a child had paid the price. They did not speak. No words could excuse what had happened. They lowered their heads, waiting for the sheriff to address them. William Turner rose slowly, his shoulders trembling. He looked at each of them, his eyes burning with sorrow and anger. "You disobeyed a direct order," he said quietly. "You allowed your hate to decide the life of an innocent child. Do you understand what you have done?" The room was still, the air heavy with shame. One of the deputies tried to speak, stammering, "Sheriff, Silence!" William's voice cut sharply through the room. "Your excuses mean nothing. Your actions killed my daughter. Do you even understand that?" The words hung in the air, as weighty as a stone. The deputies shifted uncomfortably, unable to meet his gaze. They had been part of the sheriff's team, men he had trusted, but now they had betrayed him and his family. William knew that he could not let this go unnoticed. He would not allow hatred to continue unchecked, not in his town and not within the walls of the law he upheld. One by one, he dismissed the deputies from his presence. Some would face termination, some legal consequences, and others would be required to leave the county. It was a bitter decision, but necessary. The lives of children and families depended on it. Dr. Harris packed his bag slowly, his eyes still on Emily. "I am so sorry," he said again, his voice gentle. "I came as fast as I could." "I tried." The sheriff nodded, his grief tempered by a small flicker of respect. "I know you did everything you could. You came when you were needed. I am grateful for your effort, even if it was too late." The townspeople began to gather outside, hearing the news. There were tears, hugs, and shared sorrow. Emily had touched everyone's life in some way, and the grief of her passing united them. Some whispered apologies, some knelt in prayer, and some, who had not known her well, simply stood in quiet reflection. William stepped outside to face them, his heart heavy but determined. He spoke to the crowd, his voice calm but firm. "This tragedy has shown us the cost of hate and prejudice. My daughter's life has been lost because some could not see the value in every human being. From now on, this town must change. We must respect each other, and we must act with compassion even when it is difficult." His words carried weight. People nodded, some wiping tears from their eyes, realizing the truth in what he said. In the following weeks, Sheriff Turner worked to rebuild trust and enforce justice. He spoke openly about the tragedy, making sure the story of Emily's death was known, not to punish but to educate. He shared the truth of what had happened, that the best doctor had been stopped because of bias, and that the cost had been a young life. He worked tirelessly to teach that prejudice had no place in law enforcement, and that every person, regardless of who they were, deserved respect and fairness. Dr. Harris returned to his town, still grieving for the life he could not save. But he also gained respect from the community. People who had doubted him now saw the truth of his skill and his compassion. Even the sheriff in his sorrow made sure to speak of the doctor's dedication and courage. Emily's name lived on not just as a symbol of loss, but as a reminder of what it meant to fight for justice, equality, and love. William Turner would never forget Emily. Every morning, he visited her grave, laying fresh flowers, whispering words of love and promising that her death would not be in vain. He vowed to fight prejudice in the town, to ensure that no other child would suffer the same fate. He trained new deputies with care, teaching them not just the law but the importance of heart and justice. The town slowly healed. The pain of loss remained, but people worked to honor Emily's memory by living with compassion. Families reached out to neighbors they had never spoken to, Children were treated fairly regardless of differences, and the sheriff's office became a place where respect was demanded and hate had no place. Even though Emily was gone, her spirit lived on in the change she inspired. The sheriff, though broken, found strength in action. He channeled his grief into teaching, guiding, and protecting, ensuring that the lessons learned from that tragic night would not be forgotten. The story of Emily Turner became one that the town would never forget. A young girl whose life ended too soon taught them about love, trust, and the dangers of prejudice. And for Sheriff William Turner, every day was a reminder of what was truly important: to protect, to care, and to ensure that no hatred could ever again claim the life of someone he loved. Even in sorrow, there was hope. The sheriff, Dr. Harris, and the townspeople all vowed that Emily's legacy would guide them, shaping a better, kinder, and more just community. Her life may have ended, but her story would continue, teaching the town that love, courage, and compassion must always triumph over hate.